A billionaire pulls up to a homeless woman, sits beside her. And what he says next changes everything. The city never slows down. Cars weave through intersections, their horns blending into the distant chatter of pedestrians. The sidewalks are alive, people rushing to lunch meetings, tourists snapping pictures, joggers navigating through the crowd. But in the middle of all this movement, Angela sits still. She's on the same bench she's occupied for months, across from a coffee shop where the scent of roasted beans never quite reaches her. The cup in front of her, an old fast food soda cup with faded colors, has a few coins rattling inside. Most people walk past without looking. Some glance at her for half a second before turning away, as if acknowledging her existence would make them responsible for it. Angela used to fight for this country. A Marine. Strong. Resilient. Now, she fights to make it through the day. Her hands, rough and weathered, clutch the straps of her old military backpack, a relic from a past life. Everything she owns is inside: a blanket, a tattered sweatshirt, a few canned goods from a church shelter. She shifts slightly, trying to stretch her aching legs. Sleeping on concrete does things to the body, things she never thought she'd have to endure. She pulls her coat tighter around her shoulders. It's early spring, but the cold still lingers in the mornings. The bench is metal, biting against her skin, even through layers of fabric. Across the street, people sip their lattes and laugh like nothing in the world could touch them. Then, a car slows down. Not just any car. A sleek, black Rolls-Royce. The kind of vehicle that barely seems real. The kind that belongs in the glossy pages of magazines. The tinted window rolls down just enough for the driver to exchange words with someone in the back. And then, the door opens. A man steps out. He's tall, well-dressed, charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, watch that probably costs more than an entire block of apartments in this part of town. Angela doesn't recognize him immediately, but there's something familiar about his face. She's seen it before, maybe in the news, maybe on a billboard. A billionaire. One of those men whose name carries weight, whose money moves mountains. She expects him to glance at her the way the others do. A moment of pity, a polite nod before he moves on, but he doesn't. Instead, he walks toward her. Angela tenses. She's dealt with all kinds. Some people mean well, others don't. Sometimes it's a lecture, a sermon about life choices, a backhanded comment disguised as concern. She braces herself, but he doesn't say anything at first. He just sits down beside her, hands resting on his knees. For a long moment, neither of them speak. She side-eyes him, expecting him to start talking about a new foundation or a charity project that would use her as a photo op. Instead, he turns slightly, looking at her. Not through her, but at her. "You were in the military." His voice is steady, matter of fact. Angela's eyes narrow. "What makes you say that?" He gestures to her backpack. "That's standard-issue military gear. And the way you sit. Straight back, shoulders squared. Trained posture." She exhales sharply. Most people don't notice things like that. "Yeah," she finally mutters. "Marine Corps." He nods, as if he already knew the answer. She doesn't ask how he knew. Maybe he's just observant. Maybe he's been around enough veterans to recognize the signs. Either way, it's been a long time since someone looked at her and saw more than just a homeless woman. But something about this doesn't add up. Guys like him don't stop for people like her. They don't sit on cold metal benches when they have private jets waiting for them. So why is he here? And more importantly, what does he want? Angela shifts slightly on the bench, her fingers tightening around the straps of her backpack. She's used to people passing by, throwing her quick glances before disappearing into their lives. But this man, this billionaire, he's different. He's just sitting there, watching the city move like he has all the time in the world. She exhales, turning her gaze forward. "You gonna tell me why you're here? Or are we just gonna sit in silence?" The man leans back slightly, hands clasped together. "I saw you," he says simply. Angela scoffs. "Plenty of people see me. Most don't stop. Most don't know what they're looking at," he counters. "They see a woman on a bench, maybe a cautionary tale. I see someone who's been through hell and made it out alive." She studies him now, really looks at him. There's something behind his eyes, something heavy, like he's carrying a weight he doesn't talk about. He doesn't look at her with pity, and that's what throws her off the most. "You a veteran too?" she asks, testing him. He shakes his head. "No, but my father was. Army. Served 2 tours. He never talked about it much, but I saw what it did to him." He pauses. "And I saw what happened when he came home." Angela's shoulders relax slightly. She doesn't like to admit it, but it's easier talking to someone who gets it, even if it's second-hand. People who've never lived it don't understand. They don't know what it's like to give everything for your country and then come back to nothing. "You never said your name," she says. A small smirk tugs at the corner of his lips, like he's amused that she hasn't figured it out yet. Elliot Baines. Her eyes widen slightly. Now she knows where she's seen him before. He's not just rich. He's one of those rich men. CEO of a massive tech company, philanthropist, the kind of billionaire whose every move is followed by cameras and headlines. People either love him or hate him, but either way they know his name. She lets out a low chuckle. "What the hell is a guy like you doing sitting on a bench with someone like me?" Elliot doesn't flinch at her bluntness. "Maybe I needed a reminder." "Of what?" "That money doesn't fix everything." Angela huffs. "Tell that to my empty stomach." He nods, like he expected that response. "When was the last time you had a real meal?" She shrugs. "I had a sandwich yesterday. Some guy handed it to me before I could even thank him." "Before that?" She stays quiet. Elliot presses his palms together. "Come with me. Let's get you something to eat." Angela shakes her head. "No offense, but I don't trust guys in expensive suits offering me favors." "I get that," he says. "But this isn't about a favor. It's about a conversation. One you might need more than you realize." She eyes him, debating. The logical part of her tells her to say no. She's been burned before, people pretending to care just to make themselves feel better. But there's something about him that makes her hesitate. He doesn't seem like he's here for a photo op. He seems genuine. And damn, she's hungry. "Fine," she mutters, grabbing her backpack. "But if you try anything shady, I've got a mean right hook." Elliot chuckles. "Noted." They stand up, and for the first time in a long time, Angela walks beside someone who doesn't make her feel invisible. But what does he really want from her? Angela follows Elliot down the sidewalk, keeping a few steps behind, her instincts on high alert. People move out of his way without him saying a word. It's the presence, the expensive suit, the aura of someone who's used to power. Meanwhile, she's spent years being ignored, blending into the background like she doesn't exist. The contrast makes her stomach turn. Elliot stops outside a quiet restaurant. Nothing flashy, but definitely not the kind of place that welcomes someone in tattered clothes, carrying their whole life in a backpack. Angela hesitates. She's been kicked out of places like this before, usually before she even sets foot inside. "You sure about this?" she mutters. Elliot glances at her. "Yeah. You?" She exhales, bracing herself. When they step inside, the air is thick with the smell of roasted meat and fresh bread. Warm. Inviting. The kind of comfort she hasn't felt in years. A waiter starts toward them, his polite smile faltering when he sees Angela. His eyes flick to Elliot, then back to her. She knows that look. The silent calculation of whether she belongs here. But before the waiter can say a word, Elliot speaks. "2 seats. Booth. In the back." The waiter straightens. "Of course, sir." Just like that, they're seated, a white napkin in front of her, silverware that actually shines. Angela glances around, half expecting security to come and escort her out. When no one does, she exhales and picks up the menu. "Get whatever you want," Elliot says. She hesitates, eyes scanning the page. It's been so long since she had a choice. Most of her meals come from shelters or whatever she can scrape together. "You're gonna regret that offer," she mutters, then orders a steak, mashed potatoes, and a slice of pie. Elliot smirks. Good choice. They sit in silence for a moment. Angela shifts in her seat, feeling the weight of something unspoken hanging between them. "So," she finally says, "you gonna tell me why you're really here?" Elliot doesn't answer right away. He leans forward slightly, elbows resting on the table. You ever think about how you ended up here? Angela stiffens. You mean being homeless, or everything that led up to it? Both. She exhales, leaning back. I don't like to think about it. Thinking doesn't change anything. But it matters, he says. Your story matters. She scoffs. To who? Elliot's expression doesn't change. To me. She studies him carefully. Why? For the first time, there's a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, like he's weighing his words, deciding how much to say. My father came back from war a different man, he says finally. He lost himself in the bottle, couldn't hold a job, pushed everyone away. And when he lost everything, no one helped him. Angela swallows. She knows that story. She's lived that story. I was just a kid, Elliot continues. I didn't understand then, but I do now. And I know what it's like to watch someone disappear into the cracks of a system that doesn't care. Angela doesn't speak for a long moment. That why you stopped? She asks. Because I remind you of him? Elliot exhales sharply. Maybe. He looks her in the eye. Or maybe I just got tired of walking past people like you and pretending it wasn't my problem. Angela's throat tightens. She's had people offer her food, drop a few dollars into her cup, but no one's ever said that to her before. No one's ever admitted they saw her and actually felt something. The food arrives, breaking the tension. Angela picks up her fork, but she doesn't eat right away. She watches Elliot, trying to figure him out. All right, rich guy, she says finally. Let's say I believe you. What happens now? Elliot leans back, a small smirk forming. That depends on you. But what he's about to propose will change everything. Angela chews slowly, letting the warm food settle in her stomach. It's been too long since she's had a real meal, and she wants to savor it. But Elliot's words linger in the air between them, heavy and unresolved. What do you mean, it depends on me? She finally asks, setting down her fork. Elliot folds his hands on the table. I want to help you. Not just with a meal, not just for a night, for good. Angela stiffens. She's heard this before. People with good intentions, throwing around words like help and change, only to disappear when things get difficult. She's learned not to believe in promises. She laughs, but there's no humor in it. You want to save me, is that it? Elliot doesn't flinch. No, I want to give you an opportunity. What you do with it is up to you. Angela narrows her eyes. What kind of opportunity? He leans in slightly, lowering his voice. I want you to work for me. She blinks. What? I own multiple businesses, foundations, programs, companies. I could give you a job, start you somewhere steady, help you get back on your feet. Angela scoffs. You don't even know me. I know enough, he says. I know you're not here because you're lazy. I know you've survived things most people wouldn't. And I know you're more than what the world sees when they look at you. Angela grips her fork tighter. She wants to believe him. Wants to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone sees her as more than a statistic. But trust isn't easy when you've been let down so many times. She shakes her head. Why me? Why not someone else? Elliot exhales. Because I walked past too many people like you before and did nothing. I don't want to do that anymore. Angela looks down at her plate. The last time she had a steady job, a real place to sleep, a future. It feels like another lifetime. Think about it, Elliot says, sliding a business card across the table. You don't have to decide now. But if you want a way out, this door is open. Angela stares at the card. The words blur slightly as a wave of emotions crash over her. She pockets it without a word. But what happens next is something neither of them could have expected. The moment someone snaps a photo of them together, the internet takes over. By the next morning, headlines explode across news sites. Billionaire Elliot Baines, spotted dining with homeless woman. What's the story? Social media speculates wildly. Some people praise him for his kindness, calling him a hero. Others accuse him of staging the whole thing, saying it's just a PR stunt. Angela only finds out when she wakes up to a group of reporters outside the shelter where she spent the night. "Angela, what did Elliot Baines offer you? Do you think this is just for publicity? Are you accepting his help?" The questions hit like bullets. She pulls her hood up, trying to slip away, but the cameras follow. Her life was already hard. Now it feels like a spectacle. Later that day, she finds herself back on the bench where this all started, gripping the business card in her hands. She could throw it away, disappear again. Or she could call the number. She looks at the world around her. People still passing, still not seeing her. Except now they do. But is that really a good thing? Angela turns the business card over in her fingers, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down on her. The past few days have been a whirlwind. One moment she was just another invisible person on the street, and now the entire world seems to have an opinion about her. She hates it. The attention, the cameras, the speculation. She hasn't called the number yet. Something in her gut keeps telling her there's more to this than what Elliot let on. And she's right. The next morning, she walks into a public library, using one of the computers to search Elliot Baines. She already knew he was a billionaire, a public figure. But what she finds stops her cold. His father, Daniel Baines, U.S. Army, served 2 tours in Iraq, died in a VA hospital 10 years ago. Angela grips the edge of the desk. She remembers that name, not from the news, from her past. She clicks through old articles, her pulse hammering in her ears. The pieces start to fit together in a way that makes her stomach turn. She knew Daniel Baines. Not well, but well enough. He was in the same VA support group she attended after her discharge. She remembers sitting in those dimly lit rooms, surrounded by other veterans who carried their own ghosts. Daniel was one of them. Quiet, polite, but you could see the war still lived in his eyes. She also remembers the last time she saw him. He had just lost his apartment. Said he didn't want to be a burden on his son. Said he'd figure something out. A month later, he was dead. Angela leans back in the chair, staring at the screen. This isn't random. Elliot Baines didn't just stop because he saw her on the street. He stopped because she reminded him of his father. Her hands shake as she logs out and steps outside, the morning air sharp against her skin. The weight of it all sinks in. She wasn't just another homeless person to Elliot. She was a piece of a past he never got closure on. Angela exhales, staring at the business card again. Maybe it's time to get some answers. That afternoon, she makes the call. A woman answers, crisp and professional. "Mr. Baines's office." Angela clears her throat. "Tell him it's Angela. He'll know who I am." There's a pause. Then, "Hold, please." A few seconds later, Elliot's voice comes through the line. "I was hoping you'd call." Angela grips the phone tighter. "I know who your father was." Silence. Then a quiet exhale. "I figured you'd put it together." Angela swallows. "Why didn't you just tell me?" Elliot's voice is steady. "Because I didn't want you to feel like a charity case. I didn't stop for you because I felt guilty about my father. I stopped because I know what happens when people like him, like you, get ignored. And I don't want to be one of those people anymore." Angela closes her eyes. She doesn't know what to say to that. Elliot speaks again. "Come to my office. Let's talk properly. No cameras, no press. Just you and me." Angela hesitates. But maybe for once, trusting someone isn't the worst idea. Because this time, it's not about charity. It's about something real. Angela stands outside the towering glass building, gripping the straps of her backpack. The city hums around her, horns blaring, conversations blending into a dull roar. But she's stuck in her own head. She could still turn around, walk away, go back to the streets, fade into the background where no one expects anything from her. But something keeps her planted in place. With a deep breath, she steps inside. The lobby is pristine, polished floors, sleek furniture, the kind of place where people like her don't belong. The receptionist looks up, startled, but before she can say anything, Elliot appears from the hallway. "Angela," he says, his tone neutral, but there's something in his eyes. Relief, maybe. "Come on in." She follows him through glass doors into an office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It's modern, expensive, everything she expected from a billionaire. She crosses her arms. "All right, Elliot, no cameras, no press, just us. So tell me, what do you really want from me?" Elliot leans against his desk, watching her carefully. "I meant what I said. I want to help you, but only if you want it." Angela huffs. "Help me how? By throwing money at me? Getting me a hotel room for a few nights?" Elliot shakes his head. "No, by giving you a job." Angela lets out a short laugh. "Doing what? You think I can just slide into some corporate gig?" "No," Elliot says calmly. "I want you to work with veterans. People like you, like my father. People who never got the support they deserved." Angela blinks. She wasn't expecting that. "I'm funding a program," he continues. "Not just a shelter, real rehabilitation, job placement, counseling, long-term support. But I don't want to build something for veterans without veterans. I need people who understand. People who have been in the trenches, both on the battlefield and after it. That's you." Angela stares at him, her chest tightening. This isn't pity. This isn't a handout. This is a chance to do something real. "You're serious?" she asks, her voice quieter now. Elliot nods. "I wouldn't have stopped that day if I wasn't." Angela looks down, her thoughts racing. She's spent years being ignored, overlooked, passed by. Now someone is offering her not just dignity, but a purpose. And for the first time in a long time, she considers what it would mean to say yes. A month later, Angela walks through the doors of a newly renovated building in Austin, Texas. The sign out front reads, "The Daniel Baines Veteran Support Center." She glances at Elliot, who's standing beside her, watching the final touches being put in place. "You actually named it after him," she says. Elliot nods. He would have wanted this. Angela exhales, running a hand through her now trimmed hair. She looks different. Clean clothes, a steady job, a place to stay. But more than that, she feels different. She looks around at the staff, some social workers, some veterans like her, preparing for the first wave of people who will walk through these doors, looking for a second chance. She thinks about the bench she used to sit on, the way the world passed her by. And now, she's here, helping people like her. She turns to Elliot. "You know, you could have just walked past me that day. Why didn't you?" Elliot gives her a small smile. "Because my father told me once. The only way you fail someone is by pretending not to see them." Angela lets that sit for a moment. Then she steps forward, ready to greet the first veteran who walks through the doors, because she sees them, just like someone finally saw her. Angela's story isn't unique. There are thousands of veterans on the streets, forgotten by the very country they served. But one moment of truly seeing someone can change everything. If this story moved you, consider helping veterans in need. Support local shelters, volunteer, or simply take a moment to acknowledge those who have been left behind. And if you believe in the power of second chances, hit that subscribe button, because everyone deserves to be seen.